The United States has shot down the suspected Chinese spy balloon that's been travelling across the US over the last few days. Authorities temporarily closed the airspace over the Carolina coastline as the balloon approached the Atlantic Ocean, where a fighter jet finally brought its journey to an end. Beijing claims the balloon was a civilian research airship that strayed into US airspace. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who broke off plans to visit China earlier this week, called the incident a clear violation of US sovereignty. Well, here is US President Joe Biden speaking to reporters about the downing of the suspected Chinese spy balloon.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was as it got over water outside within the 12-mile limit. They successfully took it down, and I want to compliment our aviators who did it, and we'll have more to report on this a little later.
Well, let's get more on this with DW Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, D.C. So what more do we know about how this balloon was brought down, Sumi?
Rahila, new information has been coming to us. The Pentagon has released a statement about the operation, and they confirmed that these were fighter jets from the U.S. Northern Command that took down the balloon over the coast of North and South Carolina in U.S. territory. That is important because it dismisses any questions about jurisdiction here. The statement also said clearly this was a balloon being used by China to surveil sites in the U.S. So that is a response to China's explanation of this being a weather balloon. And I found it interesting as well that the statement said that President Biden gave his green light for the Defense Department to move ahead and take down this balloon on Wednesday when he was briefed about what was happening. It was then the military leadership itself that deemed that taking the balloon down over land was too great of a risk because of the size and altitude, as they wrote here, of this balloon, the threat of debris injuring people. So they decided to wait until this balloon was over open waters. And as soon as it was, again, off the coast of the Carolinas, they then took action. And they said in a statement, we will, quote, always put the safety and security of the American people first. And, you know, you saw that soundbite from President Biden just there. He was landing in Maryland en route to Camp David for the weekend. Interesting that he emphasized again that he gave his green light on Wednesday. The military decided to wait until the moment was right. The reason he's really been driving that home, it appears, is because he's been under a lot of pressure, particularly from Republicans for not having acted sooner, perhaps even before the balloon entered U.S. territory. His answer is that he gave a green light. The military decided the time was right now.
And how important is it for the Pentagon to gather evidence?
Very important. So, indeed, the Pentagon said in its statement that they believe that this balloon, and particularly the payload, so that is the heavy part of the balloon, under the balloon, rather, that's conducting the surveillance, that it is of significant intelligence value. It's being reported here that the Navy and the Coast Guard are now working together to gather the debris of this balloon in the waters. We don't have any further details on how they're collecting it, but again, it's considered to be very important. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in his press conference on Friday, said this was the #1 mission, to know what exactly the contents of that balloon are and to carry out an analysis on what exactly is in this balloon and that payload, as I mentioned. The Pentagon, I should add, had been saying for a few days that they didn't believe that this balloon had as much capability, counterintelligence capability, as, for example, a satellite. So it wasn't seen as great a threat as a more high-tech surveillance device. But again, there is a lot of value, according to the Pentagon, of recovering the contents of this balloon and analyzing it.
And now looking at the diplomatic relations between the United States and China, where does this leave things?
Well, this is a huge diplomatic confrontation. That's what it's being called here, certainly. You know, the fact that Secretary of State Antony Blinken had to cancel his trip, this was a trip the State Department released in a statement yesterday that was rigorously planned. There was a lot of importance placed on this trip because things are essentially so bad between the U.S. and China. On Thursday, the U.S. announcing that it is increasing its military presence in the Philippines to increase its footprint in the region to thwart what might be a possible Chinese action on Taiwan in the future. There were several other issues on the table, from Hong Kong to human rights violations in Xinjiang, the South China Sea, Russia's war in Ukraine as well, and how China might be able to play a role there. So there was a lot to discuss. And the fact that Antony Blinken had to cancel his trip, that the U.S. had to take down this balloon, is a sign of just how difficult things are between the U.S. and China right now. Just to add, Rahila, the State Department, did say that the lines of communication remain open, that dialogue will continue with China, and that a trip will go ahead by the Secretary of State when the conditions are right. But we don't know what that means, when the conditions will be deemed right or good enough for the Secretary of State to make that trip.
Okay, that is DW's Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, D.C. for us. Thank you.